Hi fight fans and welcome to the Neutral Corner, a weekly boxing show that will be looking ahead and looking back at all the weekend's boxing action. Coming up on this week's show, is it the end for Joyce? What next for Philip Hrgovic? TKV TKO'd in controversial circumstances. We'll be looking at the fallout from David Adelai's controversial stoppage victory. We also have plenty of action in America with Torres Jr, Mason and others shining, while Delgado and Rodriguez steal the show. Ennis and Stanionis look to unify the welterweight division this weekend. A full preview of that fight and many more. So there's probably no better place to start on this week's show than looking back at the weekend that's just passed, and it was one full of boxing action. Hi fight fans and welcome to the Neutral Corner, a weekly boxing show that will be looking ahead and looking back at all the weekend's boxing action. Coming up on this week's show, is it the end for Joyce? What next for Philip Hrgovic? TKV TKO'd in controversial circumstances. We'll be looking at the fallout from David Adelai's controversial stoppage victory. We also have plenty of action in America with Torres Jr, Mason and others shining, while Delgado and Rodriguez steal the show. Ennis and Stanionis look to unify the welterweight division this weekend. A full preview of that fight and many more. So there's probably no better place to start on this week's show than looking back at the weekend that's just passed, and it was one full of boxing action. Philip Hrgovic scored a unanimous decision victory against Joyce at the weekend. That was a star fight, of probably the most notable card of a weekend that was featured quite a lot of good boxing and plenty of fights to get into throughout these review shows, I should say. So there was plenty happened on this card. There was a lot of good action, a lot of exciting action, some knockouts, a bit of controversy. We'll get on to all that later, but we'll first look at the main event. So a quick look through obviously the card in total, as you can see, quite a deep card. Plenty of talent on the usual left side with victories, but a few good fights at the top end of the bill. So I'll get straight into the Joyce Hrgovic fight. It was not quite controversial. I thought it was a close fight. I thought it was hard to score. Joyce was his usual self. Hrgovic was his usual self. They both took a lot of punishment. It significantly felt like Joyce was taking the brunt of it down the stretch. I think as the rounds went by, it just seemed more apparent that he was taking heavy artillery. The first round started pretty identically to Hrgovic's fight against Daniel Dubois. He come out and it almost seemed like it emptied the tank. Was breathing a little bit heavy after the first round, and this is sort of normal for Hrgovic. But he did pace himself a little bit better in this contest, maybe due to the fact that Joyce is at that stage of his career where he's not really able to pull the trigger himself. He's a little bit sluggish and doesn't really go through the gears like a fighter like Dubois does, or other fighters at the higher end of the heavyweight division. So it was a good pick and fight. There was no complaints over the action. I think the complaints that many people have at this point is the 39-year-old Joyce, who is taking far too much punishment. He's had a short career so far. I think that was obviously his 20th fight, but we really don't want to see him in these wars too much more. It's taken obviously a lot of wear on him physically, possibly mentally, and it's not something we want to see. But it was close enough to warrant the fact that if we're going to label Hrgovic as a potential world title challenger, especially when the belts become fractured, which is inevitable within the next 12 to 18 months, then I guess Joyce is not going to walk away from the sport. Why would he walk away from the sport when there are going to be offers out there? There was obviously the offer of Dillian Whyte fight, which obviously fell through, and that's where Hrgovic came in as a replacement. And the fights are there for him. It's a heavyweight division that's relatively stacked in terms of it's deep. It's a deep division, even if it doesn't have the depth of star talent. It's almost like an NBA draft class where there's like, you know, the top guy who's completely out there above everyone else, like a Wembanyama or something, and then the rest of the draft class is good all the way through down into like the second round. And that's sort of what the heavyweight division is right now. It's everything beyond Usyk is good. If not outstanding, it's good. And that's why Hrgovic, and obviously in the case of Joyce, is always going to be offered these fights, and he's always getting opportunities to make more money. And if you're making money, then the last thing a fighter is going to think about himself is his health. He's going to put the fact that there's still opportunities out there above all else, and it would take someone else stepping in and saying, look, you know, this is enough now, and really to put it into his head that he needs to rethink whether he stays in boxing. But to the fight, here was how I scored it. I had it 95 apiece. I'm not sure everyone would agree with that. I would understand anyone that had Hrgovic ahead, and I admit there are rounds in there where it was hard to pick just because Hrgovic was landing, but Joyce was also having success. Both of them were obviously Joyce was on the front foot for much of it as well. And yeah, it was just a genuinely quite hard fight to score in certain rounds, but there were a lot of rounds that were quite easy to score as well. But as you can see, I sort of had Hrgovic out the blocks quite quickly. I felt like at the halfway stage he was ahead, even if marginally. And then I felt it was quite back and forth in the final 5 rounds, which probably suggests how close those rounds were. And some fans would have probably had, and even the judges would have had Hrgovic winning multiple rounds in a row, which I couldn't complain with. I never looked at the end of the fight and Hrgovic was declared the winner and thought to myself, oh, that's a bad decision. I genuinely thought it was reasonable. All the scorecards I felt were reasonable. Maybe the 98-92 one I think was harsh on Joyce. I think to only give him 2 rounds felt slightly unfair, but I can certainly see the 97-93 and 96-95 scorecards. Obviously 96-95 has obviously had an even round in there, which again, with the closeness of the rounds, cannot fault whatsoever with that logic. But ultimately, yeah, a good performance from Hrgovic. It puts himself back in the picture in terms of maybe meeting someone slightly on the outside, maybe a rematch with Zhali Zhang. I mean, that's feasible. Maybe it puts him, so we know that Deontay Wilder's coming back. Maybe it puts him in the mix to fight Deontay Wilder later in the year. Yeah, these are genuine opportunities. We've got another fighter that we'll be coming to with Torres Jr. That's a makeable fight. Another fighter that was in action at the weekend, Hughie Fury. You know, is that a plausible fight to make? It's certainly for those guys I've mentioned, like Torres, Wilder, and Hughie Fury. Hrgovic is a winnable fight for all of them. But at the same time, Hrgovic is skillful enough and has enough variety in him and has enough of a name value now to be a good opponent and to be an opponent that would give those guys a tough fight. And in the case of any 3 of them, he could potentially beat them. So I think all 3 of those could be good options, and that's what Hrgovic has done. He's kept himself in that mix, and he's putting his name back in the bag. In, like what I've said, is a very deep, if not extremely talented, it's a very deep heavyweight division. It's only getting deeper as these fighters obviously stay active for so much longer, and the depth of it is incredible. As for Joyce, we probably have to assume that he won't retire. Again, for the aforementioned opportunities that are out there for him, so we're not going to take into consideration that he's going to retire. I think there's plenty more out there for Joyce, and I think he'll carry on fighting. It was a busy undercard at the Carp Live Arena in Manchester this weekend, and probably, if not the most notable fight, but certainly got to start at the sort of top end, certainly in terms of the billing, and that would be the Jack Rafferty Corey O'Regan fight. A good competitive fight until the finish. It was O'Regan was looking every bit the part of a challenger, and seemed to be giving as good as he got. In fact, for me, he was winning the early rounds. He was ahead at the time of the stoppage, and it just felt like his style. He was quite upright, but he kept distance very well, had a nice jab, and it felt like it was going to be a tough fight for Jack Rafferty coming in. I mentioned the fact that he'd fought so recently against Reece McMillan, and you almost worried a little bit in a sense, in fact that Jack Rafferty might just be like lining up these fighters in great form. He's just feeling like he's going to win and not taking the seriousness of how tough a fight this was. O'Regan was certainly going under the radar, but was more than worthy of being in the ring with Rafferty. But ultimately, he's a 14-0 fighter. He might be the same age, 29, but he's certainly less experienced when you look at his opposition. And it proved when he got knocked out. It was a punch that he didn't see coming. It was a unofficial break. That's basically obviously where the referee doesn't call a break. We'll come on to that in a minute in the next fight, which took place after this. But it was an unofficial break. He dropped his hands, obviously thinking that Jack Rafferty wouldn't throw a punch during that sort of like breaking, because they were a little bit weren't tied up as if they couldn't punch, but they were certainly in a position where both of them had to step back to let the action continue. Rafferty did the right thing. There's nothing wrong with what he did morally or even by the rule book. It was completely above board. It was all on O'Regan, unfortunately, and he just let his guard down, got caught by one shot, and that ultimately was the end of the fight there. The stoppage wasn't too long in the waiting after that, but that just ended the fight right there. It ended as a contest. The power was inevitable. Whether that would have happened anyway, it's hard to tell. It feels like one of those fights where it's just unfortunate that it's ended like it did, because ultimately O'Regan lost that fight on a mistake on his part, but that's boxing. That's how fights go. And it would have been interesting to see, had he not made that mistake, had he not been caught by that shot, would he eventually been caught by another punch at some point with his guard up, or whether he was pulling out something like that. It's impossible to know, but he certainly put himself in the shop window for more opportunities, and he's just got to take that one on the chin and learn from it. And remember, the golden rule in boxing is defend yourself at all times, and unfortunately Corey learnt the hard way on Saturday night. There would, I guess, be the same sort of thing to say about Jamie TKV. Jamie was doing very well, much better than most of us expected, by the 6th round of this contest with David Adelaide. And then the break came. It's hard to tell whether the referee doesn't seem to shout break, but he's breaking them. And the way the fight had gone to that point, it was notable that was the way he was breaking them. And he was breaking them quite quickly because there was a lot of tying up. And it felt like he had it in for TKV from very early on in the fight. I think the commentators were noting and really kicking off about the fact that he grabbed TKV's arm. it was obviously the other hand that was down, so it wasn't like he grabbed his, I think he grabbed his left hand, if I'm right, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe he grabbed his left hand, and then it was the right hand that he wasn't being touched at, he didn't have up to his chin, and he got caught flush by that punch from Adelaide. So it wasn't exactly like the referee had taken away his defensive arm, but it obviously had an effect. Someone pushing your hand down and basically initiating a break, you're going to see that as almost an opportunity to put your hands down and feel like they're going to be pushed aside, like had been happening for much of the first 5 and a bit rounds. That didn't happen, and he was obviously severely punished for that. But again, the commentators made a point of it, but it was something that he'd been doing all fight. He had been doing that literally from the first round. The referee, Ron Kearney, was the referee, and he had constantly done that to TKV throughout the first 5 and a bit rounds. He'd been grabbing his hand, and at some points it looked like he was getting involved in the fight. It looked like he was slapping the two fighters, like as if he was telling them off for being like naughty school kids. He was literally slapping both of their hands, and it's a technique I've seen before, and I hate it. I genuinely dislike it. I always feel like they're fighters, you know, they could throw their hands at any point, and if you're not breaking them up and you're just slapping someone's hand away, that's allowing that other fighter to carry on punching while he's less able to defend himself because his hand's been slapped away, therefore in a position not to defend himself. It's a terrible train. I've seen it several times. I think I've seen it by several referees in America, and I think it's absolutely shocking and should not be allowed at all. If a fighter believes that one fighter is holding on, he should break it up and he should warn the fighter. He should never be involved in there slapping a fighter's hand down. That should not happen, because you're allowing the other fighter to carry on punching. We know all about infighting, and when there's no holding, you can infight. If there's a whole rule of if there's one arm free, well, you can't knock an opponent's arm free. That's just not fair. You know, even if they are breaking the rules by holding, you've got to warn them. You can't allow the other opponent to have a free shot basically at them. So it was terrible refereeing. I've seen it and I hate it. Really dislike referees that do it. And TKV obviously has a genuine reason to be complaining, because his hand's been knocked down. He obviously has put his guard down, and there is that whole defend yourself at all times. There's no doubt about that. I don't think a break was called, but either way, he's knocked his hand down, which has hindered his defence. So there's not much else to say about this fight, because it was just bubbling up at that point, and I felt like TKV was well in the fight. I think he was probably ahead at the time of the stoppage, but ultimately that moment just changed it. And again, it's whether that would have happened anyway, regardless, is hard to tell. The fact that Adelaide, we knew, had that power, but TKV had been taking it well up until that point, and obviously it's hard to distinguish whether he would have been able to carry on taking those punches, because you can't really look to that punch, because it was landed when TKV wasn't ready for it. And as any fighter will tell you, the punches you don't see hurt the most, and when you're not expecting a punch to be thrown, that's when you can get KO'd. Unfortunately, that's going to be the real standout point from this fight, and I think the British Boxing Board of Control will have no choice. It was a vacant British title fight, and I think they'll have no choice but to call an immediate rematch. I don't think there'll be too many grounds to make it a no contest or anything like that, but I think there'll be no choice but to call for an immediate rematch, because ultimately controversy will be too great. As for the rest of the card, Khalil Majid beat Alex Murphy. This was a competitive fight. Scorecards, I think, showed that. I think it was a good fight. It was enjoyable. Majid seemed to have technically the better skills, but certainly the work rate was with Murphy. I had Majid a few rounds up. I think I had him 4 rounds up against C. Bit of a fight of runs. I felt like Majid was the better in the early going, certainly boxed quite nicely, but Murphy really did get going in the middle rounds. There's a couple of rounds there as well that I'll probably give to Majid that could have easily gone in Murphy's favour. I felt that Majid ended the fight quite well, which did enough for him to be victorious. So just to end, a couple on this card, just a couple more fights and note. Delicious Ori made his professional debut. Another solid Olympian, great amateur, coming in with some fanfare. Obviously not quite the same fanfare as Pat Brown just a week ago, but he comes in, nice 4-rounder, 40-36. We'll see how his career goes in the heavyweight division, but this was a nice start, and we'll see what the competition looks like in the future for him. There was also the return of Mark Chamberlain, his first fight after losing to Josh Padley in September last year. He won comfortably against his Argentinian opponent, 80-72, and he seems to, will hopefully be back on track and able to step in. We'll see if he stays now at the super lightweight division. Obviously, it's not unusual for a fighter to just move up a few pounds, having been out the ring for such a length of time. But we'll see if this is his new venture into the super lightweight division, where there are plenty of opportunities for him on the domestic scene. There was a homecoming for Janabek Alimkhanuly. Back in Kazakhstan, he gets a comfortable 5th round victory. But it wasn't all plain sailing. I have seen some of the highlights of this fight. So obviously quite hard to get much on it over here in the UK. It was aired, I think, on ESPN Plus in America. And well, Encine came in with obviously quite a reputation as a puncher, very well built, and you could see that in the ring. He looked tough, almost like a smaller version, a middleweight version, almost a Shannon Briggs. Got the same sort of like hairstyle, and obviously the coloured beard. It looked absolutely great. He looked magnificent in the ring, and he gave a hell of an effort as well. Seeing some of the highlights, and Alimkhanuly, no doubt, he's dominating the fight, but Anuel, he's in there. He sticks up close to him. He keeps winging away. Takes quite a few punches himself, but never really backs up. It was just in that 5th round, he took one too many. He tagged him, and then the second left hook came in and completely wiped him out. He was in no position to continue. The referee made the right choice. But it was ultimately a fun fight. It was a fun homecoming. It was probably a good opportunity for Alimkhanuly while he's waiting for the opportunities against the other champions. I did mention in the preview last week, I'm not sure what Janabek can do now. I think his options are limited in a relatively poor middleweight division. He's obviously the champion of the IBF and WBO. I don't think beating Carlos Adames or Erislandi Lara do anything particularly to enhance his reputation. So whether he does really want to unify those belts, it seems like the better options are waiting for him up at super middleweight. Or he might look at hoping that some fighter moves up and tries to take that opportunity, but the middleweight division not quite what it has been, and Janabek obviously could carry on knocking out opponents of this level, with the utmost respect to Anuel, but we want to see him in the super fights now. We want his name should be being talked about in the sort of pound for pound discussion, because that's potentially how good he is, but we just genuinely don't know his level yet because he hasn't fought the type of opponent that's going to bring that out of him. So hopefully we'll get more chances to see Janibek against the top guys in the future. But this was a fun fight. If you can find some highlights on YouTube, or if you can find a full fight, it's probably worth watching, because Anuel gave a great account of himself, and that's all he needed to do, really. And he's now got the opportunity to maybe put himself in the mix against some other potential contenders in the future. Maybe even get himself a fight against one of the other champions, like Adames or Lara, where he could possibly fare better. But he was against the best fighter in the division, and there's nothing to be concerned about for him and his career. He lost to the best in the division, a fighter who we yet don't know how good he is. Lindolfo Delgado escaped with a majority decision against Elvis Rodriguez in Las Vegas on Saturday night. It wasn't the main event, but it really was the most significant fight on the card, of what was a fight card that featured a lot of the young talent again under Top Ranks banner. As you can see, you had the likes of Richard Torres Jr, Delgado Mason, young potential stars like Jahi Tucker, Stephen Navarro. Plenty of good action on the card, but this one was a standout fight going into it, and it lived up to the billing of being the best fight of the night. It was close all the way through. A lot of hard to score rounds. Elvis Rodriguez boxed really well off the back foot. Delgado seemed to take a little bit too long to get going. He was a little bit too tentative, maybe a little bit too respectful of Elvis Rodriguez's own power as a counterpuncher. You also get the impression Delgado likes to counter himself. He likes to be an offensive counterpuncher, and obviously Rodriguez's style made that quite hard to implement. But plenty of action throughout this fight. It come to a majority decision. Just 2 rounds in it for the two judges, while the other one scored it dead level. This was how I scored the fight, 96-94 in favour of Rodriguez. As you can see, I felt like Rodriguez, especially in those middle rounds, he really started dominating those middle rounds. Started to look a class above his opponent, and it looked like he's going to take this fight, and he's going to control this fight, and he's going to win quite comfortably. But Delgado, to his credit, did come on in the later rounds. He looked really good in the later rounds. I thought it ended strong. I didn't think it was enough for him to nick the victory, but having scored it 96-94, I couldn't complain massively about it being 96-94 the other way. I just felt personally that Rodriguez, after a quite decent start, should have had enough in the bag. I felt like he'd won enough rounds by round 5, round 6 to win the contest, and ultimately the judges did not agree. But a great fight anyway, and I think the potential reason for a rematch. I don't think anyone complained about seeing that, because it was an action fight. It was 2 styles that clashed quite nicely. A lot of heavy punches landed. Also, a lot of Delgado's work to the body. I think that maybe sometimes goes unnoticed with judges or analysis, people watching. But I feel like his body work was really good, and hopefully he can develop that a little bit more to become a little bit more of an active pressure fighter, because you're going to come across a lot of Elvis Rodriguez's. Probably not with Rodriguez's power. I think that was a pointer as well, which probably pushed Delgado back a little bit more. But that sort of style, and we've seen it recently with William Zepeda, such an aggressive fighter who's come unstuck. Obviously didn't lose, but certainly came unstuck and become a little bit exposed against Temu Farmer in back-to-back fights. And you could see obviously Delgado in this super lightweight division, a ridiculously competitive division, coming under the same scrutiny when he fights more fighters with very good boxing ability. So what was the main event? Richard Torres Jr. quite comfortably beat Guido Vianello. Vianello obviously has been in several of these sort of fights, and has always fought at a good level. Has that really good win against Makhmudov in his last contest. And Richard Torres Jr. obviously not the biggest of heavyweights, 6'2", kind of old school size, old school frame, old school fighting style, and old school everything, old school haircut, old school moustache. It's all great television, and obviously he's becoming a bigger and bigger hit in America. American fight fans love him. He's all action, and I mentioned him with potentially Hrgovic as a option that I think Top Rank could start looking at. He's sort of past this stage now where he's fought the gatekeepers, and obviously Vianello is a little bit higher than the gatekeeper. But now it's probably time to mix in with the guys that have been involved in a lot of these Saudi cards. I think it's time for Torres to get in that discussion. Even though he's still only 13, I just feel like he's been going a little bit longer than that. But I think there's a reason to start thinking he could maybe take those kind of tests against somebody like a Hrgovic, someone of that sort of level. And I think he's got the potential of faring quite well at that level as well. One fighter who's probably closer than ever now to world title action, and that's Abdullah Mason. I've mentioned him so many times, massive fan of this kid. I think he's got absolute star potential. He took on Carlos Ornelas, who's as tough as they come. Very hard to get out of there, takes punches really well. Has mixed in with a lot of good names and has developed quite a nice record. But Mason was sensational, picked him apart, body shots were beautiful, really busted him up as the fight went on. And Ornelas, you could see he desperately wanted to be able to get through the 10 rounds. He was just taking too much punishment, and it was ultimately stopped at the end of the 6. But I say, really good fight, and yeah, another victory for Mason. He ticked off more boxes. He boxed really well here. He was against a shorter opponent. He stuck punches into the body. He worked around him quite nicely, and ultimately just broke him down slowly but surely. So another box tick for Mason, who's looking absolutely set to be a world champion. But let's not forget, he's in the hottest division possibly in world boxing, the lightweight division. It's full to the brim of young, talented boxers. And Abdullah Mason is obviously right there in the mix. And maybe let's get him a more well-known name next. Get him in there with someone moving up from super featherweight, former world champion, etc. Let's get him them options, and let's see what we're looking at, because he's doesn't feel like he's too far behind someone like Keyshawn Davis right now, who's obviously with the same promotional company, obviously fought on the same show a couple of months ago. And that's the other notable thing. One more mention for Mason. He's fighting regularly, which is absolutely great to see. It's already his second fight this year. He was ridiculously active in 2024. This kid's going places, and Top Rank are doing an amazing job with him so far. Let's just see the results when he steps up to the next level. And finally, I mentioned Vijay Tucker and Troy Williamson. It was a great opportunity for Troy to go out to America. He'd obviously started to become a little bit more of a gatekeeper over here in the UK. He stepped up in weight division and did what he does always, really. He went the distance. He's as tough as they come. There's really not much chance of stopping him, and Vijay Tucker dominated the contest, looked good doing so, but couldn't get Williamson out of there. But it's a good 10 rounds for Jahi, and we'll see if he can continue to bounce back from a tough 2023 where he suffered the first defeat of his career. Also had a draw there as well, but he seems to be bouncing back quite nicely, and this can probably rank quite high up there as maybe the best win of his career so far. In Australia, Tszyu got his career back on track with a fourth round stoppage of Joseph Spencer. It's quite a comfortable victory really for Tszyu. I think it was sort of expected, maybe not to be done as quickly as it was concluded in the end. Ultimately, Spencer just didn't look like he had much in the tank. Looked considerably small next to Tszyu, which is quite interesting in the super welterweight division, considering Tszyu is not the biggest super welterweight anyway. Rarely looks big compared to his opponents, but he looked just stronger in every department against Spencer, and it was the first couple of rounds. Joey Spencer seemed to be game, but the third round was really the telling point. That was when Tszyu started to get through. You could see Spencer was sitting on the back foot, not really offering a whole lot offensively. Tszyu just upped his output, and Spencer couldn't go with it. Simple as that. I don't think he had much that he could offer back power wise to keep Tszyu off him. And once Tszyu started teeing off, the referee was looking very closely. The corner ultimately threw the towel in, which obviously is quite telling when a corner throws a towel in inside the fourth round. Shows maybe there's something a little deeper there. It's almost like the first sign of trouble that the fighter was in. There was getting him out of there, which probably tells you as much as you want to know. I think the referee was giving him the opportunity, giving the benefit to the doubt, but the corner know their fighter best, and obviously maybe they did look at it as says, you know, if he does get into any trouble, then we're going to stop the fight, and ultimately they did that. So never really got completely warmed up into much of a contest, but it's a confidence booster for Tszyu, and that's probably the most important thing for him right now, coming off those two defeats, especially the last one against Murtazaliev, coming by stoppage. It's that invincibility worn off a little bit. So this was exactly what he needed, and should put him back in line for more significant fights later on this year. I think at this stage, it's easy to say that Daniel Blender dos Santos is just bound to never fight in the UK. It's yet again his opportunities gone by the wayside. He was obviously set to fight Bradley Rea, who was massively disappointed himself that this contest got called off at the last minute. But dos Santos had his initial fight with Shakan Peters called off because of a failed brain scan. And then he was set to fight Shakan Peters again. That fight got called off because Peters pulled out, was ill. And now it's obviously right at the last second, with Bradley Rea stepping in a few days' notice. It was dos Santos who was taken ill and was unable to fight a whole there. So obviously Bradley Rea, despite stepping in at the last minute for his European title fight, didn't get his opportunity. So it just seems inevitable now that dos Santos is never going to fight in the UK, and that's all there is to it. But such a shame again. I think we would like to see dos Santos. We know his improvements that he's made since the Joshua Buatsi fight, but yeah, again, we've been robbed of that opportunity. I think it would have been a good fight. But the main event that ended up being was a very good one indeed. Ben Crocker and Tiernan Bradley fought to a draw. I think most people seem to probably have favoured Bradley to have won the fight, but it was close. Both had a judge scoring it 97-93 in their favour, which really sums up it was a classic case of what you like each round. I wouldn't say the styles are massively different, but because they did fight quite close in the centre of the ring much of the contest. But Crocker, who was much taller, much the bigger fighter, he seemed to control it with his jab, obviously getting in the backhand, countered quite nicely, whilst Bradley was the more active fighter. And I felt like when Bradley had good rounds, he had really good rounds. Certainly in the middle stages of the fight, he seemed to really turn it up, and at some point he even had Crocker in a little bit of trouble. There was my scorecard. As you can see, it was really the middle rounds where Bradley really took over. I think the first like 3-4 rounds was really hard to score, could go either way, but it was then that Bradley seemed to take over the contest. But a little bit as expected, Crocker had a better pedigree over the longer distance. Came on in the last 3 rounds, seemed to win them across the board to close it up for me. I still had Bradley just about ahead, but it was a fantastic contest, and it's probably best to run it back. I think both fighters would be interested in that. They seemed like they wanted that to happen, and it was competitive enough. It was exciting enough to make another fight. And I think next time I would fancy Bradley a little bit stronger. I did fancy him in to win this fight anyway, but obviously having had that experience now of a hard 10 rounder, he'll be coming back a lot stronger, I'm sure, and obviously looking to finish the fighter to fight stronger than he did this time. It was a fun night of boxing on Friday night. Appearance at Stamford Bridge, Chelsea FC's ground. For many fighters of the UK, also a little bit international feel as well. Same with America, a little bit international feel. In this US versus UK, we had Roy Jones Jr. there. It was sort of team Roy Jones Jr. against team Spencer Oliver. Great little show, plenty of fun action throughout the card. Obviously no real household names, but certainly some names that are some positive fighters that are looking like they could be getting into some kind of title action in the next year or so. So plenty of fun action that happened. Probably the fight that stood out the most was this cruiserweight matchup, 6-rounder, Oriel Ignat against Stanley Johnson. Ignat obviously represents the United Kingdom from Moldova. Really good fighter, former kickboxer, and certainly got a lot of power. Showed down his last fight against Scott Forrest, which was on one of the boxer bills, so obviously got a lot of recognition for that. And Stanley Johnson came in undefeated, had his own power. It was always going to be a scrap, and they delivered. It was 18 minutes of carnage. It was exciting. Johnson got dropped in the first round. It looked like he was going to struggle to see out the 6-round distance, but probably from the 4th round onwards, he really came back into the fight, really gave it one hell of a go, nicked a couple of rounds at the end, and it was just altogether a fun fight, and limitations for both of them were there for everyone to see, but they're going to be in fun fights. Ignat, again, first couple of rounds you're thinking, wow, this is another demolition job. He's such a tall cruiserweight, got clear power, but he fights at a really, really high pace, and you've got to feel like he's lucky it's only a 6-rounder, because I feel like Stanley Johnson paced himself a little bit better, and that's why he come on so strong near the end. I think if this had been maybe a 10-round fight, you could have fancied Johnson to maybe start to break through and maybe even get a later stoppage, but it was fun, and we're going to see Ignat in some fun fights. Hopefully we see him maybe in some area title fights, maybe in the English title at cruiserweight. It's going to be exciting to watch for the next few years, so one to watch for UK fight fans. A less exciting fight, but probably a little bit more competitive on the scorecard than it really was. Mandeep Jangra, who was trained by Roy Jones Jr, boxed beautifully against Marley Mason, who's a good sort of area level fighter here in the UK, has a couple of defeats. There's some good fighters in the Louis O'Doherty and Aaron Prosper, but was certainly out of his depth a little bit here. Jangra boxed really nice on the back foot, kept the jab flowing, kept the distance. Mason was a little bit crude at times, just couldn't really get inside where he needed to fight. Jangra fought at long range and no range basically, so if he wasn't at long range and keeping Mason on the end of those punches and making Mason miss, he sort of stepped in, closed that gap completely, and left Mason with no room to sort of work. So it was ultimately a frustrating 10 rounds, and you could see the fight was going on. Actually, Jangra was picking it up and was looking the more likely to get a stoppage, even though neither were even close to being stopped. But it looked like he could be the one that could have turned it up a little bit at the end, because Mason was a little bit disheartened. But still a good fighter. I'm sure he'll be in plenty of good fights in the super featherweight division and around that. You know, a good fighter to see at like sort of area level, and I hope this doesn't I'm sure it won't affect him too much. It's a good 10 round fight for him to have. Jangra, if he has the right backing behind him, has potential to make a little bit of a wave. I'm not quite sure how far he can go, but I can certainly see his ability to draw in a crowd. He's obviously a fighter from India, trains out to Florida with Jones, and it'd just be interesting to see if he steps up that level to see what he can do, because he's a very neat boxer, and he's got some potential there. It's just whether he can take that boxing ability up to the next level. The scorecard there, 96-94, like I said, was far too close. I think Jangra pretty much won every round. But again, that's the problem with a referee scoring a fight. They're doing too much, and in this fight there was a little bit of work for the referee to do. They don't really see it properly. I think somebody from outside of the ring would be able to watch that fight and say, yeah, that was a comfortable win for Jangra. But yeah, don't like the referees having to score fights. I did worry about it when it goes to the referee scorecard, because I'm not sure he's seen the fight properly, and clearly the fact that he scored it 6 rounds to 4 sort of shows that he didn't, but at least the right man got the result. So this weekend's previews, really just one card to preview this weekend, to start in the second week of April, and that's headlined by Jaron Boots Ennis and Amanta Stanionis. It's a really good fight as well. It's a unification fight. IBF and WBA titles on the line here in the welterweight division. Also got quite a good undercard fight there. Raymond Ford against Thomas Matisse. Good fight on paper, and could be quite an interesting co-main event. Also, Arturo Papoca is in action against Christian Carto. Fighter with a good record on paper, although we will delve into that a little bit at the end of this preview. So we start obviously with the main event. I think this is one of the standout fights in April. Going to take place in Atlantic City at the Boardwalk Hall. So Jaron Ennis, who's the full IBF champion, had a lacklustre performance against Chukadzian last time. It was the second time he fought Chukadzian. I'm going to put that down to the lack of interest from him. I think the lack of interest from anyone for that fight was pretty significant. But yeah, just a general lack of interest in, if you're fighting a guy who you shut out completely to become the interim champion, like just over a year before, well, nearly 2 years before actually, because it was right at the start of 2023. So there was a lack of interest there, and probably a lack of motivation. This is a much better fighter than that, and I'm sure he'll have the opportunity to prove that against a much different challenge in Stanionis, the Lithuanian. He's proven to be more than just a good prospect. Came through, was pushed through pretty quickly. He's been pro since just 2017, and in recent years has wins over the likes of Thomas Delorme, Razbab Beterbiev, and most recently ended the unbeaten record of Gabriel Mestre. So ended a few unbeaten records, and certainly has the making of being a genuine threat in the welterweight division to the likes of Jaron Ennis, who's obviously a big name. It's a really good unification fight, and I think this is probably a tougher fight than maybe some people are giving Stanionis credit for. I think he's a very classy operator. He's probably a little bit slow with both his feet and his hands. He may need to get more on the inside. Not quite. I wouldn't say he's a destructive puncher, but I think he's hard enough puncher to get the respect. I think he's a little bit more footing puncher. When he gets inside, sets his feet. It's quite a nice variety on his punches. While Jaron Ennis a little bit more fluid, probably naturally got more power, and certainly is more likely to catch you with punches that you don't see coming. So the experience is obviously a lot different, but Stanionis has been moved a little bit quicker in his career, while it took a little while for Ennis to get to this stage, mainly because of the sort of limbo he was in when waiting for that world title shot, while Terence Crawford and Errol Spence Jr were really almost constantly waiting for those two guys to match up. So that sort of made it a little bit of a waiting game. But now he's getting his opportunities, and hopefully he does step up to the plate here and puts in a good performance. I think anything less than obviously a dominant performance here from Ennis, from Boots Ennis, would be considered a little bit of disappointment, just because of the Stanionis not having the biggest platform throughout his career, and obviously being a little bit of an unknown quantity. So I think that would be unfair, because I think this is a genuinely tough fight for him. But style-wise, I do like Ennis in this fight. I think Stanionis is going to bring the fight to him. He's not going to stand off too much, but he's also not going to rush Ennis too much, which will allow Ennis to sort of pick his shots, to get on the back foot, to use the ring. And obviously as the fight goes on, I think he'll find a rhythm. But Stanionis will have his moments throughout the contest. I think he'll have times when he'll get on the inside, when his work rate will be higher than Ennis, and that will allow him to nick rounds, when Ennis probably, if he just upped his work rate, would win the rounds with his classier work. So that will keep the fight close. But I actually suspect that Ennis will come on down the stretch and will start to extend his lead. Maybe put a few hurtful, spiteful punches together as well, as Stanionis realises he's got to step his work rate up and take a little bit more of a risk, and that will open up opportunities for Ennis. So the pick boy for Ennis to win, I think it goes the distance. I think Stanionis is tough enough to withstand the late heavy punches from Boots, and I expect Boots to get a victory by a fair few rounds. There might even be a really wide scorecard in there in his favour, but I think he'll be the deserved winner of a competitive but not quite comfortable, but a comprehensive victory that will really establish himself as maybe the front runner in the 147-pound division. This one's a fight I like. I think I like most Rea Ford fights. I think he's a very good fighter who takes on all comers, and there's probably a little bit of perception of this being another gimme fight for Rea Ford after losing to Nick Ball in 2024, but I don't think it is. I think outside of Ball, this might be the toughest fight of his career. You could also put the Kolmatov fight in there as well, which he was behind at the time of the stoppage in the 12th round. But obviously Kolmatov hadn't had the experience at that point of his career, while as Thomas Matisse completely different. Not quite a veteran status yet, but he's certainly been in the ring with a lot of different styles and fought some good fighters over the years. Had a few defeats, a draw early on in his career when he was matched quite hard. Hamazarian, he fought him twice, had a split win and a split draw. Lost to Will Madeira. Also lost to Isaac Cruz with majority decision back in 2020. and that was sort of at a point where Isaac Cruz was this, the bogeyman of the division, and was considered obviously to be an elite fighter, and it took him to a majority decision then. Really kind of revived himself as well with that Christian Tapia win in 2022, which is a little bit against the odds, and he quite comfortably won that fight, including dropping Tapia en route. And then there was the technical decision defeat against Eduardo Hernandez last time out, which I think for him would have been a disappointing performance against a fighter who you would have to consider was in a similar position to him. It was a crossroads matchup. So Ray Ford's obviously going to be favoured. I do like Ray Ford. I think he's a very capable boxer. I think he can punch when he needs to. He can be aggressive. And I think all this will lead to a very competitive matchup. I think Matisse, maybe some people will underestimate him here, but I think he's got a significant amount of pedigree, and it'll be a tough challenge for Raymond Ford. I expect Ford to come out victorious. I think it's a schedule for 10 rounds, so I believe over the 10-round distance that he will just have enough to edge it. But I think it's got that kind of majority split decision kind of feel to it. I think there will be different ways of scoring this fight, because there will be a lot of rounds that are very close. But I'm taking Raymond Ford to just edge it. But much like the main event, I think this is a lot closer than some people will give it credit. I think one fight that won't be close is this one. I think Popoka is obviously being set up to challenge here in the super bantamweight division. He's coming off a couple of very close victories in recent fights, but a split decision in his last contest with some varied scorecards. But I think Jesus Valdez is actually a better fighter than what he's fighting here in Christian Cartel. Cartel from Pennsylvania will come in on a decent winning streak, and obviously a lot of stoppages in there as well, which has significantly shown some power. But again, the level of competition hasn't quite been there for Carlos Buitrago in his last fight, and Buitrago obviously a considerable veteran of the boxing world. He has a stoppage defeat in there against a 22-10 fighter who stopped inside 2 rounds, and I expect Popoka to get the stoppage somewhere around the middle of this 10-rounder. I think he's been set up quite nicely in Mexican, and he should get some nice ranking points. It's the WBC Continental Americas title fight. But yeah, I think he gets a nice victory, and probably much needed for him after the last 2 contests going the distance and being so close on the cards. So a few little bits of news to bring, starting off with the WBC. A couple of important notifications from the WBC early this week. The main headline, obviously, with Dimitri Bivol vacating his WBC belt, meaning that David Benavidez is now the title holder, the recognised title holder, at £175. So obviously big opportunity for Benavidez, world champion now at light heavyweight. Obviously it's going to be a significant fight, I'm sure, for him coming up in the summertime. It also obviously confirms pretty much that we're going to be seeing the Bivol Beterbiev trilogy, because obviously the other option that even Turk Sheikh had mentioned before the Bivol Beterbiev rematch, that the winner would fight Benavidez, but obviously with the result being another close one, this time in Bivol's favour, it's obviously only right that the trilogy takes place, and they're going to try and make it as quick as possible, which is great news for fight fans. I think we don't want to see Beterbiev at this stage of his career grow old overnight. If we push this fight back by another 12 months, are we going to see the same Beterbiev? So let's get this third fight on as quickly as possible. It's a rarity in boxing to see back-to-back-to-back fights between 2 fighters. It's very, very rare. We usually see maybe the first 2 fights happen in quick succession and the third one happens sometime later. But it's nice to see a bit of a change in that trend and making this fight. And obviously it is the biggest one. It's still one of the biggest fights in boxing right now. But ultimately we will want to see the winner of that trilogy, the rubber match, fight this man Benavidez. He's going to deserve his opportunity. There's probably no fighter out there deserving of a super fight more than Benavidez. Waited so long on the Canelo fight that never happened, and he's obviously now waiting in the wings for Bivol and Beterbiev. I'm sure he'll get his opportunity, but I'm sure he'll get a nice defence in the summer. His first defence of his now full title, and then we want to see the big one. But yeah, this pretty much confirms Beterbiev and Bivol will obviously be fighting each other, and that's why he's had to vacate the belt after the WBC put in obviously a date for when Bivol had to, decide whether he would fight Benavidez or move on from that title. Another ordering this time is WBC has officially ordered negotiations to start between Shakur Stevenson, WBC belt holder at lightweight, and his mandatory challenger William Zepeda. They've got 30 days, so it will be May 6th. If they haven't agreed a purse bid by then, if they haven't agreed to a contract by then, it will go to purse bids, and obviously the highest bidder between Matchroom's Eddie Hearn and who promotes Shakur, and obviously Oscar De La Hoya, who promotes Zepeda. So Zepeda obviously been on the periphery of this for a long time. He's been waiting in the wings for quite a while. He's tough fights like the Tevin Farmer fight, and credit to him, after a controversial victory, he opted to try and make that right and gave Tevin Farmer his second opportunity, which was well deserved, and Tevin Farmer put in another terrific effort, albeit coming up short again, and I think this time was the right decision. But obviously the cracks are there. I think most people have mentioned it now that before those Farmer fights, it was always, Zepeda could just be a really tough challenge for Shakur Wallace. Now, after those Farmer fights, you start to think to yourself, well, if a former super featherweight can move up and cause that many problems for Zepeda and never really look too hurt in any moments in either of the fights, yeah, that's a bit of a concern. And I think Shakur would be a heavy favourite going into that contest now, despite the pressure Zepeda would put on him. I think styles that Shakur has is clearly going to be a problem for a fighter like Zepeda. So yeah, that looks like a tough ask for Zepeda, but he deserves his opportunity, and hopefully he gets it, and hopefully we get this fight while we're sort of waiting on the super fights like Shakur against Gervonta Davis, which is obviously the one we all hope to see. But this would be a nice one in the interim. Some other news for world title defences. Richardson Hitchins is set to return to Madison Square Garden Theatre on June the 14th, and he'll defend against George Kambosos Jr, the former IBF obviously champion in the lightweight division. So yeah, this is kind of expected after Kambosos sort of signed up with Matchroom. Hitchins went obviously over and defeated Kambosos' countryman Liam Parrow. Obviously, I'm sure Eddie Hearn had sort of an idea of Parrow versus Kambosos, a bit of a star fight in Australia. Obviously, Hitchins went over and won that belt. So with Kambosos on board, he was always going to try and push him into a world title shot. It's an intriguing fight, but I think we feel like Kambosos has sort of found his level, and we're still waiting on him to sort of produce that performance again that he did in, stunning the boxing world against Teofimo Lopez. And I think every fight that Kambosos has had since, in both victory and defeat, has sort of made that win over Lopez seem more mind-boggling every single time. So obviously the big pick would be for Hitchins to win this one. His boxing skills are superior, and he seems to have a style that should be all wrong for Kambosos, but that'll be the fight. And maybe you think to yourself, oh, Hitchins probably, the first defence would deserve a little bit of an easier, not quite a gimme, but certainly an easier defence considering the talent that is currently in the super lightweight division, which hopefully we'll see Hitchins mixing with in the near future. So final bit of news is a good fight. Sergei Bohachuk against Mikhail Fox. He's almost complete for May 17th. Yeah, and this should be a really exciting clash. Bohachuk never out of a dull fight. We obviously saw his all-out war with Virgil Ortiz Jr. He was supposed to fight at the end of the year last year against Madrimov. Ended up against Ishmael Davis instead, and obviously got a stoppage win there. So Mikhail Fox, who has been in with many good fighters over the years, has had a few tough decisions go against him. I think I remember against Ismael Barroso maybe a couple of years back, where he seemed extremely unlucky not to win. So yeah, this has all the makings of a good fight. Fox, a very, very tall fighter, could cause some problems in that regard for Bohachuk, but Bohachuk is relentless, comes forward, not the best defence, but plenty of aggression and quite a lot of power as well there. So real clashing styles, and should be a really good fight. Fox can mix it up, and often due to his height, he sort of has to fight that distance fight, but often gets dragged into a bit of a tear up. So I think this will follow a similar pattern. I think Fox will have a lot of good moments, but Bohachuk will drag him into a fight. So yeah, this one should be an exciting fight for a very, very busy May schedule. Finally, to round things off in the world of boxing, it's a more than a rarity to see this, but boxing, professional fighting in Cuba on Friday night, live on the Zone. You see some very, very notable names: Julio Cesar La Cruz, Arlen Lopez, Lazaro Alvarez, and Erislandy Alvarez. All superb Cuban athletes, all well known in the amateur game. Made waves at the Olympics, at World Championships for many, many years. And here they all are, all undefeated. Most of them 3-0. You see Lazaro Alvarez with a 6-0 record. All in contests over 10 and 12 rounds in the case of Cesar La Cruz against Dylan Prasovic at heavyweight. So what an amount of action. What a monumental occasion, really, to see professional boxing in Cuba, to see such high profile Cuban athletes in action. So that's one to really keep an eye on if you really like your prospects. We've seen some of the best American prospects, the best British prospects, some of the best Mexican prospects in recent weeks, recent months, and this is a great chance to see the best of Cuba fighting in Cuba. Also, one of note, it's Veterans Day on the 11th of April in Mexico, because Miguel Roman and Oscar Escandon get together for a contest. Two great fighters, two well-known names, both in terms of Escandon already in his 40s, Miguel Roman very close to that now. Two fighters have really been stalwarts in the lower weight classes, in the sort of featherweight, bantamweight, super featherweight divisions, that really held their own, given so many good prospects and fighters on the verge of world title fights, really good runs for the money. also still notching up some notable wins as well. So 2 fighters obviously at the very, very twilight of the career, and it'd be nice if this would be the perfect way for them both to end, to fight each other and put on a bit of a spectacle in Mexico, and maybe just both go out on the back of this, because they both had tremendous careers, not Hall of Fame careers, but certainly careers that they can be very proud of, and they'll be remembered for many fight fans, and it's great to see them in action. So thanks for tuning in, and leave comments at the bottom as well on all your opinions on the fights last weekend and the fights coming up this weekend. And follow and subscribe would be much appreciated. Also have Modern Boxing TV on TikTok as well. You'll be find plenty of like short videos and scorecards and stuff like that. So would be much appreciated if you go follow on there as well. And see you all next week.